Montana Territory. Autumn of 1877, the wind carried snow off the peaks and across the hard, packed dirt of the town of Elkhorn as Delia Rae pushed open the door to the general store with her hip. Her baby balanced on one arm and her cane clutched tight in the other. People stopped talking when she walked in. Some pretended they had not seen her. Others stared bold-faced. Her limp had been worse today, stiff with the cold, and her cheeks were flushed from the effort of walking the half-mile from her cabin. Her baby, little Violet, barely 6 months old, stirred in the blanket wrap against her chest. Delia kept her chin high and moved to the counter. She laid down the coins she had saved all week and asked for flour and lye soap. Behind her, someone muttered just loud enough for the room to hear. Should have stayed wherever she came from, that baby's got no father and she walks like a busted wagon wheel. Laughter followed. It stung, but she did not flinch. She had heard worse. The shopkeeper hesitated, eyes darting between her and the others. Then he scooped the coins into his palm and slid the sack of flour toward her. She turned slowly, cane steady beneath her hand, and walked out without a word. Outside, the wind bit hard. Violet whimpered. Delia pulled the blanket tighter around her daughter and waited for the ache in her hip to ease enough to make the walk back. "Ma'am," a voice called behind her, deep, steady. She turned her head and saw a tall man step down from a buckskin gelding. He wore a worn duster and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but when he stepped closer, she saw his eyes clear blue, direct. He stopped a few paces from her, not too close, like he understood something without needing to ask. "I saw what happened in there," he said. "You all right?" She nodded, though her throat burned. "I am used to it." He looked at her for a moment, then down at Violet. "Your little one got a name, Violet," she said. "She is beautiful," he said quietly. Like her mama, Delia blinked. People did not say things like that to her. Not anymore. Not since she had come back to Montana alone, limping from the wagon accident, carrying a child no one wanted to ask about. "I am Kade Brody," he said. "I just came back from cattle driving down in Texas, looking to settle a bit north of here. Got land near the creek, about 5 miles out." She nodded but said nothing. "I meant what I said," he added. "About her, about you." Delia shifted Violet on her hip. "Most folks see a limp and a baby and think that is all there is to know." "Well," Kade said, a little smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, "I reckon those folks are blind." She stared at him for a long second, unsure what to say. He stepped back, giving her space. "Can I ride you home?" "I'll walk the horse beside you if you do not want to ride. It is getting colder by the minute." She hesitated. "I do not take favors." "All right," he said gently. "Then let it be a trade. You tell me where a man might find a decent place for coffee around here, and I will see you safely to your door." Delia looked at the dusty road, then at Violet's pink cheeks. Her legs ached. Her hip was nearly locking up. She nodded once. He helped her mount up first, lifting Violet into her arms once she was settled. Then he took the reins and began walking beside them, one hand lightly on the bridle. They walked the trail in silence for a while, the late light slanting gold through the lodgepole pines. Delia watched the way he moved, steady, sure, like he had spent most of his life in the saddle but had not forgotten how to walk beside someone who could not. At her cabin, Kade helped her down carefully and waited until Violet was safely tucked in her crib inside before he spoke again. "Delia," he said, still standing outside her open door. "I know we just met, and I am not saying anything I do not mean, but I have been a long time on the road and I have seen a lot of faces. Yours is one I would not forget." She looked at him, heart thudding. "You do not have to say things just to make me feel better." "I am not," he said. "You are what I have been waiting for." Her breath caught. He tipped his hat. "I will be back tomorrow. I got a fence to mend, but I will bring coffee. You can tell me if you think that is a good idea." Then he turned and walked back to his horse. Delia stood in the doorway, the wind brushing her hair back, her baby sleeping soundly in the next room, and for the first time since she had come back to this quiet, judgmental town, she smiled. By morning, the frost had taken hold of the ground, and the brittle grass along the creek snapped under boot. Delia stood at the edge of her lean to shed with a hatchet in hand, splitting kindling with deliberate strokes. She'd left Violet bundled in her cradleboard inside, close to the stove, and every few minutes she paused to listen for signs of waking. A horse's hooves approached slow and steady. She didn't turn until she heard the dismount and the quiet scrape of boots across frozen soil. "I brought that coffee," Kade said, holding up a tin pot and a small parcel wrapped in cheesecloth. "Beans too, ground 'em fresh this morning." Delia lowered the hatchet. "You grind beans before sunrise?" "Got a hand mill in my pack," he said. "Didn't figure you'd want to do it yourself, not with a babe and a busted hip." He handed her the parcel. Inside were 2 biscuits that still held warmth. She hadn't had flour to spare for baking since last week. "You can come in," she said. "If you take your boots off." He did, without a word, leaving them by the door. Inside, the heat from the stove met them in a soft wave. Violet stirred in her cradle and let out a small grunt before falling quiet again. Kade glanced around. "You built this, mostly." "My pa started it before he passed. I finished the roof and laid the stone for the stove. Took me most of a winter." He set the pot near the firebox. "You did it right." Delia poured water into a tin kettle and crouched to hang it over the flame. Her leg protested the bend, but she didn't show it. "You ever been married?" she asked, still facing the stove. "No, ma'am, came close once. She ran off with a preacher's son down in Kansas." "You bitter about it?" "No," he said after a pause. "Mostly grateful. She wanted something soft. I wasn't made for soft." Delia turned and met his eyes. "What are you made for then?" "Something real." She looked away, not because she didn't believe him, but because she wasn't sure she could stand believing it. When the coffee was ready, she poured it into 2 tin cups. They sat at the rough-hewn table, knees not quite touching. She cradled her cup in both hands. "You got family alive?" he asked. "A sister in St. Paul. We haven't spoken since I wouldn't give Violet over to the nuns." He nodded like that made sense. "You shouldn't have." She said I'd never find a place again. That no one would want a woman with a child and no ring. She was wrong. Delia sipped. Her hands had stopped shaking. "You said you've got land by the creek," she said. "What are you planning to do with it?" "Raise cattle, mostly. Maybe some alfalfa once I get the irrigation right." "There's a stand of fur on the east end I'll log come spring." "You staying put?" "That's the plan. I've done enough wandering." Violet gurgled from the cradle. Delia stood and lifted her daughter with practiced ease, settling her against one hip. The baby blinked at Kade, then drooled on her mother's shoulder. "She's got your eyes," he said. Her father had brown ones. Kade didn't ask the next question. Instead, he looked at Violet, then back at Delia. "I'm not afraid of what's already been," he said. Delia shifted Violet to the other hip. "Most men are. I'm not most men." She studied him for a long time, then sat again. Violet nestled between them now, her tiny hand curled against her mother's bodice. "You said you've been looking for something real," she said. "So have I. But I stopped believing it could find me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low. "Sometimes it finds you when you're too tired to look." Delia didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away either. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like a hush, not a howl. Inside, the fire snapped once and Violet let out a soft sigh. Kade stood after a while. "I'll be back tomorrow. Got fence posts to haul today. If you want, I can bring you some oats and salt pork. I've got enough for now." "All right. If you change your mind, you let me know." He stepped into his boots, then paused at the door, hand resting on the frame. "Delia," he said. "Just so it's said plain, I'm not here to rescue anybody. I'm here because I want to be." She nodded, her voice quiet. "I know." He left without waiting for more. She stood there holding Violet, watching the place where his boots had pressed into the frost, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. The next day broke with a sullen sky, thick with gray clouds that hung low over the earth like a lid pressing down. Delia stepped outside with Violet wrapped close to her chest, the cold air damp with the promise of snow. She scanned the trail leading in from the east, not expecting anyone so early, and yet her eyes lingered on the bend in the tree line. She spent the morning boiling beans and patching a tear in the shoulder of her only winter coat. By midday, the first flakes had started to fall, slow and sparse. Violet fussed as the light dimmed early. Just as she settled her daughter down for a nap, a knock came 3 even taps, not hurried, not shy. Delia opened the door to find Kade with a bundle in one arm and a coil of hemp rope slung over his shoulder. His beard held a dusting of snow and his coat was damp across the shoulders. "I brought that salt pork," he said, holding out a cloth-wrapped package, "and a bit of sorghum syrup, traded a saddle blanket for it." She took the bundle, her fingers brushing his for a second. "You trade well." "I try," he said, stepping inside only after she moved aside. Violet stirred in her cradle but didn't wake. Kade looked around, taking in the braided corn husks tied near the rafters and the small stack of firewood she'd split that morning. "You keep this place in better order than most ranchers I've known," he said. Delia sat, motioning for him to do the same. "I keep it how I need to. When you don't have much, you learn to mend and stretch." Kade leaned forward, elbows on his thighs. "I saw a trapper on the ridge this morning. Said they're closing McGregor's trail early this year, snow's coming down hard up north. That'll cut off the mail," Delia said, "and the supply wagons," she nodded, already filing that away for later. "I've got enough to last, not much, but enough. I can bring extra from my stores. I've got lard, beans, and a sack of turnips I haven't buried yet. I won't take what you need. You wouldn't be. I laid in more than I can eat alone." She studied him. "You plan for more than yourself. You were in my thinking," he said simply. Delia looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were red from the cold, the nails short and clean. "I don't expect you to be responsible for us. I'm not offering out of duty." She lifted her head. "Then what? I told you, I want to stay near, not for a day or two, but for good." Delia didn't answer. A gust of wind rattled the shutters, and Violet let out a soft sigh in her sleep. Kade reached into his coat and drew out a folded piece of paper, softened by use. "This is the deed to my land," he said. "I've been thinking of building a second cabin on the south edge, near the birches. It gets more sun and the soil's better for planting. Thought maybe, if you ever wanted more space for Violet, that'd be the place." Delia stared at the paper, then back at him. "You'd give me land, I'd share it," he said, voice steady. "Not for charity, for a life." She exhaled slowly. "You don't even know if I can love again. I'm not rushing you. I'm just offering you a place where no one turns their back on you, a place where you and Violet are wanted." Delia stood and crossed to the cradle. She brushed her fingers over her daughter's cheek, then turned toward Kade. "I've lived on the edge of other people's kindness since Violet was born. You're the first person who ever treated us like we belonged." "You do," he said. "With me." She walked to him and sat again, closer this time. Her knee brushed his. She didn't pull away. "I want to see your land," she said. "Before the snow gets too deep. I'll take you tomorrow. Bring the sled." Delia nodded. "If it's what you say, I might not want to leave." He reached out, slow, giving her time to stop him, but she didn't. His hand settled over hers, warm and solid. "I hope you don't," he said. "I've waited a long time for something true." She looked at their hands, then into his eyes. "Then let's find out if it is." The sled creaked under the weight of the bundled supplies, gliding slow behind Kade's gelding as they followed the frozen creek north. Delia sat wrapped in a worn buffalo hide, Violet tucked close against her chest beneath layers of wool. The land was quiet, white stretching in all directions, broken only by stands of pine and the occasional jackrabbit darting from cover. "Up ahead," Kade said over his shoulder, pointing with his gloved hand. "Where the birches thin out, that's the southern edge of my place." Delia squinted toward the line of trees, their bare limbs reaching upward like black thread against the pale sky. Snow had begun to fall again in fine, steady flakes, collecting in the folds of her scarf. Violet stirred but didn't cry. They reached a rise, and Kade stopped the gelding. He stepped off and tied the reins to a low branch before circling back to the sled, offering his hand. Delia took it, steadying herself as she rose to her feet. Her hip ached from the ride, but she said nothing. "Let me carry her while you walk it out," he said, brushing snow from the blanket around Violet. Delia hesitated, then passed her daughter into his arms. Kade cradled Violet like he'd done it before, careful and sure, his gloved palm cupping her head without needing instruction. The terrain leveled as they stepped through the birches. The air smelled of frozen moss and old bark. Beyond a knoll, the land opened into a wide hollow, protected from northern winds by a ridge. A thread of water still ran beneath the ice, cutting through the snow like a silver ribbon. "It's warmer here," Delia said, surprised. "South-facing slope," Kade said. "Shelter from wind, good drainage." "I cleared brush here last spring, figured it'd do for a second home once I got the main barn finished." She turned slowly, taking in the lay of the land, the way the ridge curved to cradle the clearing. "You planned this before you met me." "I did," he said, rocking Violet gently. "But I didn't know who it was for." Delia knelt and touched the frozen ground with her bare hand, feeling the solidness beneath. "This soil would take potatoes, maybe carrots come spring." He shifted Violet to his other arm. "I can bring boards down once the thaw comes. Or we build from logs, cut what we need from the north stand." Delia stood and brushed snow from her skirt. "I want to help raise it. If I'm going to live in a place, I want my hands in it." "You'll have it your way," he said. She looked up at him, the snow catching in his lashes, and asked, "Have you always wanted a family?" He didn't answer right away. "When I was a boy, my mother used to sing while she cooked, real soft, like she was trying not to wake the dust. I always figured if I ever built a home, I'd want it to carry sound like that, gentle, lived in." Delia's voice came quieter. "I don't sing much anymore." "You don't have to," he said. "You're here." "That's enough." Violet let out a small sigh, and he looked down at her, his face softer than she'd seen it before. "We can stay a while," she said, glancing at the clouds. "Let her sleep." Kade nodded and led them to a log he'd dragged there last season. He sat first, settling Violet in his lap, and Delia eased down beside him. They watched the wind move through the trees, the hush of it carried low across the snow. Kade shifted slightly to let her lean against him. She did slowly, her shoulder against his arm, their breath rising in twin clouds. "You said once you weren't made for soft," she murmured, "but this feels quiet enough to last." "I wasn't made for comfort," he said, "but I was made to stay." She looked down at her daughter's sleeping face, then at the land around them, blanketed but not barren. "I think we'll be all right here," she said. Kade didn't answer. He just tightened his arm around her back, pulling her a little closer as the snow kept falling and the land held them in silence. The snow held through the next week, blanketing the land in soundless white. Delia and Violet stayed at Kade's cabin after the first storm rolled through. His place, tucked into a low basin beyond the ridge, held warmth better than hers, and the roof didn't leak when the sun hit the slope and the melt began. In the evenings, Kade read from an old book of sermons his father had once carried west. Delia listened while she mended the seams of Violet's wraps, her needle moving steady through the cloth. They didn't speak much during those hours, but the quiet between them felt whole, not hollow. One morning, as Kade split a pine round beside the shed, Delia stepped out wrapped in her heavy shawl. She leaned on the doorframe and watched him work, her breath curling in the cold. "I've been thinking," she said when he finished the swing. He turned, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "About what, you and me and this land, about how we set things right going forward." He set the axe down and walked to her. "Tell me." "I want to marry," she said. "Not because I need a name or a place to sleep, but because I want a life that's ours. Violet deserves that." "And so do I." Kade's jaw worked once before he nodded. "You'll have it." "I don't want a preacher from town," she said. "None of them looked me in the eye when I came back. I'd rather stand under the trees and say our words ourselves." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Then that's how we'll do it." They wed 3 days later, with Violet tucked in Delia's arms and the creek running soft beneath a crust of new ice. Kade had carved 2 simple rings from antler and smoothed them with a piece of river stone. Delia wore her mother's brooch pinned at her collar, the only fine thing she'd kept through the years. As they stood beneath the birches, Kade took Delia's hand and said, "This land's been waiting. I have too. You're the piece that makes it home." Delia looked up at him and said, "I've carried sorrow long enough. I choose you, not to forget what came before, but to build what comes next." Violet cooed, and Kade reached a hand to touch her cheek. Delia felt the warmth of his fingers brush hers, and something inside her settled, like the last stone placed in a hearth. They moved into the bigger cabin once spring came, after raising the roof beam together. Delia planted onions and turnips in the thawed ground behind the house. Kade built Violet a cradle from spruce with a carved bear at the headboard. She slept better in it than she ever had before. By midsummer, the garden had taken root, and Kade's cattle grazed the lower pasture without trouble. Delia taught Violet to walk between the beans and helped Kade string wire along the southern fence line. They worked side by side, sweat beading their skin, arms brushing now and again, never by accident. One night, as the sun burned low behind the ridge and the porch cooled beneath their feet, Delia sat with her legs tucked beneath her and watched Violet chase fireflies with a stick. Kade rocked in the chair beside her, his thumb tracing slow circles over her knuckles. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I never stopped hoping." He looked at her then, not like a man watching, but like one who'd found the thing he'd been missing and knew how to keep it safe. "You still limp," he said, not unkindly. "I always will." He kissed the spot just above her temple. "Good, that way I'll always have a reason to walk slow beside you." Delia turned her face to his, and their mouths met, warm and sure, with years ahead folded in the space between them. They stayed that way until the stars came out and Violet, breathless and giggling, climbed into her mother's lap and fell asleep there, their land held through the seasons. The house stood firm through winter winds, and the soil grew richer with each harvest. Violet learned to read by the stove and to ride between fence posts with her father's steady hands on the reins. Delia no longer dreamed of elsewhere. She had found the place that needed her and the man who saw her not as broken but as whole. And every time Kade reached for her hand in the dark, she gave it without hesitation, knowing it would never again be empty.